Okay, so I'll introduce myself. My name's Eric, and I work for DCT Data Science is the name of our group. So we serve the College of Ag and Life Sciences, and the whole acronym is the ALVSKI, which includes Vet Med and extensions and other things. And one of the things we do is workshops like these. And I'll talk more at the end about like how you can get in touch with us, drop-in hours and getting other help, and data science incubator projects we'll talk about a little bit. So yeah, my job title is scientific programmer and educator, and I'll let Kristina introduce herself.
Yeah, thank you. So hi, yes, my name is Kristina Riemer. I run the CCT data science team at U of A, and yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about our group at the end, but I did put a link in the chat for our group's website so you can see all of the sort of services that we offer. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us whenever. And so I have a background in ecology, and like a lot of you, learned sort of to code by myself throughout grad school. Realized that helping other people learn this stuff is really fun and very fulfilling, and it helps everyone's research. So sort of continuing on that path with including this workshop here. So yeah.
Yeah, and same here, by the way. My background is also in plant ecology and demography. Yeah, great. So what we're going to do today is, so here's some learning objectives. Basically, we're going to talk a little bit about how to find extensions to ggplot2 and how to, sort of know where to look for things that you can do. And then we picked out a few packages that we think are really cool and useful, and probably good to know about for sort of a wide range of people. And then there should be plenty of time if there's other packages that you see that you want to check out and play around with. Or if you have other specific questions, maybe you've been to part 1 and part 2 of this series and you feel like there's something that you need to do in one of your plots and you didn't get that figured out, didn't get that answered. I think there'll be time probably to do some of that, workshop some of that stuff. So just as a little bit of an intro, so we're going to use obviously the ggplot2 package, and then in a few of the examples, I'm using the Palmer penguins package for data. And that's really all we're going to use, and then we'll load those packages as we demonstrate them and give you time to install them as we go. So just thinking about like, how can we kind of categorize these? There are different kinds of packages that extend the functionality of ggplot2. I was sort of thinking about how to categorize them. I think you can kind of put most of them into kind of 2 bins, maybe 3. One is packages that add new layers. So they add new geoms, add new scales, things like that, that you can just build on top of your ggplot you've already made. And then there are packages that kind of wrap up multiple layers for convenience, so that you call one function and it actually builds a whole plot with multiple layers. And then I guess maybe a third category that it didn't include is there are a number of packages, including one that Kristina is going to demo today, that help you build ggplots, like give you graphical interface for editing and modifying things. That's kind of a third category. So for example, a package that extends ggplot, there's an example called this package called ggBSwarm, and it just gives you this geom bswarm. And so you can add that on top of something you already have, like this, box plot here, and it adds this what's called a bswarm plot on top of it. And so you can combine that with other geoms, other stats, things from ggplot2 or from other extensions potentially. And then an example of a package that kind of wraps ggplot2 is this is a package called ggpubr, and it's got this function ggstripchart. And so you notice this doesn't start with ggplot, it doesn't have an AEF in it, doesn't look like the ggplot code we've been seeing, at least this first part. And it creates this, this thing that's got multiple layers already built into it. It's got the box plot, it's got the dots that are jittered already. It's got the, a theme already kind of built into it. But it's still a ggplot object that's returned. And so you can still add things to it. So you can still add, for example, scale Y continuous to change the number of breaks. So that's kind of the two different categories, major categories that I see. Well, how do you find out about these? The first place to look is the official ggplot2 extension gallery. And I'm going to go there right now so that we can explore this a little bit, because there are 126 registered extensions. So that's not all of them. There are other extensions, but 126 of them are like officially registered with this gallery. And you can search this by what it does. You can scroll through it to just browse. Right now it's sorted by default by GitHub stars. And so this is basically a popularity, like how popular it is. The patchwork package, if you were at the part 2 workshop 2 weeks ago, you saw that one. Oh, I forgot, by the way, to share the link to the slides. Let me do that before I move on.
I can do that.
Okay, thanks. Because you can then go to the slides and click these links if you want as well. Okay, so yeah, the patchwork package we went through using that at the last workshop for composing multi-panel plots. But there is a ton of stuff in here. ggAnimate's one of the ones we're going to look at today. Esquisse is one of the ones we're going to look at today. One, I think a question somebody had maybe in one of the previous workshops was about labeling significance, statistical significance on plots. ggpubr has things for that. Some of these just provide new themes. So this GG themes package and the HBR themes package, these just provide additional themes to kind of modify the appearance of your plot. All kinds of stuff. And I wanted to point out one that I just saw recently that I thought was kind of cool because I did hear, so there's some bioinformaticians maybe, or some people that deal with genetics data. There's GG genes, it's 3 Gs there. And this is for plotting these cool little gene plots. And so there's a function for that, which is pretty interesting. I haven't played with this. I don't work with this kind of data very often, but I see these figures a lot. And it's cool that you can create them in ggplot2. So there is a whole ton of stuff in that gallery to look through and explore. There's also this awesome ggplot2 list on GitHub. And this one is organized, not as graphically available, like you can't see the previews of them, but you can see some nice descriptions, and they're categorized by kind of what they do. So plot layers, these are, again, like these are packages that like just add another geom, or they add a scale or something like that typically. So, GG arrows. So if you want to draw arrows with more detail than is available in the base ggplot2, there's a package for that. There's all kinds of different things in here. ggplot, a geom for QR codes. So if you want to add I have no idea, what that does. So there's so much stuff here that is added. Themes and aesthetics. We've got this whole list of themes, cool stuff like color palettes that are inspired by national parks that are just kind of built in. And then this is for sort of things that are for presenting things. So like
I want to point out ggplot2 is similar to the patchworks, where you can put together multiple plots, like multi-panel plots. And that's one I used to use. Now I'm starting to use patchwork instead, but yeah.
Yeah, ggplot's great. Yes, so much stuff. Yeah, patchworks in this section as well. We have some section of packages to make interactive plots. We're going to look at Plotly today, but there's also this ggiraffe one and GG tips.
Is that actually how you're supposed to say it? Giraffe.
G giraffe. Yeah, I think so.
I didn't know that when I was looking at it. I was like,
Yeah,
GGI-raph?
I think
That's
it's G
cute.
giraffe.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
it that way.
And then network data. So that's another type of data that I don't deal with too often, but plotting networks. So there are a number of extensions for plotting networks. And then there is quite a bit you can do actually with just base ggplot2 in terms of plotting spatial data. But there are also all these other extensions for various types of spatial data plotting, maps and such, right? So tons and tons of stuff here. This is a really extensive list, more extensive than the gallery, I think, probably. And then there's one other place here that I wanted to point out. There's this R graph gallery. And I think I talked about this maybe 2 weeks ago in the workshop, the part 2 workshop. But this is a really nice website because it gives you these kind of categories of plots you might want to make to help you kind of think about how you would want to display your graphics. And then in many of these, there are examples that use extensions to ggplot2. So for example, this Corellogram section mentions the ggally package and the ggpairs function here to build these kinds of plots. And there is example and another package here, the Corellogram package. And there are examples for all of these. There's example R code to do all this stuff. So that's another good place to look for extensions. And this is also a place to start where, if you're not sure, can I just do this in ggplot2 or do I need an extension? This is a good place to look to because, not all of these examples use extensions. So for example, violin plots, you can just make with geom violin, which comes with ggplot2. So those are my favorite places to look. And then, if there's nothing there that's going to help you, a Google search with ggplot2 in there and the name of the plot. That is often the hardest part to figure out, is the name of the kind of plot that you're making. Knowing that it's called a violin plot or a bee swarm plot or whatever is sometimes the hardest part. But once you know that, it's usually relatively easy to find some kind of tutorial or blog post or something about how to do that.
I learned from looking through the gallery of extensions, they have a package called ggpol, which you can create what are called parliament diagrams, I guess. I didn't know what they're actually called, but usually when you visualize political parties, yeah, if you look that up, so I hadn't known that what those were called before.
These are like seats in
Yeah.
a parliament, basically.
Yeah, and I didn't know what those were called until I saw that. It's pretty neat.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Very
so
special.
This is a pretty
use.
Specialized, visualization. But somebody's created a package for this, and this looks like it's the type that just adds another layer there. So that's cool. So you could combine that with other stuff you already know pretty easily. Yeah.
And another, if I can say one more thing, sorry.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Another way to explore the options for extensions that I kind of discovered when we were prepping for this is if you Google ggplot extensions, there are various articles that'll, say 12 different ggplot extensions, and they'll sort of present a little bit on each of them. And so that's another way to look and see what the options are for ggplot extensions, or just these articles about 20 useful ggplot extensions. So
yeah,
highly recommend that too.
Yeah. Any questions or comments so far? You guys can interrupt me at any point. Happy to answer questions or anything. So just interrupt me. Cool. So now we're going to do some demos. And I think Kristina is going to go first. So I will let you take over the screen sharing.
Okay, so you can see the slides right now, right?
Yeah.
First, the titles. So yeah, ggAnimate is, sorry, I've got to catch up. ggAnimate is an R package that I have used in the past for some of the research that we've done. And it's really helpful for if you basically want to animate your plots in some way. And so you can see there's an example that I put here of how to do that. And so I want to talk a little bit about like how to use these packages that we'll be demoing, but also talk a little bit about how you can learn how to use them too, because that's an important part of this process. And so ggAnimate has pretty good documentation from the creators of the package. If you just Google the name of the package, I'll show you that. Spell. Probably the first hit on Google you'll get is the official documentation from ggAnimate, or from the creators of the package. And so, yeah, they have code. They sort of walk through an overview of how to use the package. And so they tried to sort of summarize it. So one of the things about ggAnimate is, and that I still struggle with a little bit, is like the lingo is kind of like technical, and it takes a little bit of time to sort of understand what they're talking about. And they actually say that in here. But yeah, so there's basically like 5 different things that you can control with animating your plots using this package. So you use the transition, it's a little bigger. You can use the transition functions to control what sort of changes over time with your plots. You can change the view. So it's basically like how much of the X and Y axes that you can see. You can have it change what that view is across time too, using the view functions. And then shadow is cool. I'll show that in a minute too. You can define how much memory is associated with the changing data. And so again, that sounds kind of vague, but it's clear when you can see examples of these things. And then, so as the data is transitioning, I think they call it tweening, you can use these enter and exit functions to affect what that looks like. And so there's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to really be able to go into a lot of detail about any of these things. And I, to be honest, haven't played with all of these different options. But there's a lot here. And we'll sort of go through a little bit of code. And you can feel free to follow along if you want, but you don't necessarily need to. But we'll talk a little bit about, how to actually use this with your code. So I'm going to switch over to RStudio for that. Put this in an R script. Okay. So yeah, we'll need the ggAnimate library. So if you don't have that already, you'll have to install the package. I'll make this a little bit bigger too. And like Eric said, I'm going to use the Palmer Penguins package, the data from that package, just to show an example of how to do this stuff. So it's another one that we need for this part. And so if you haven't seen this data set before, it's one of the common sort of like example data sets that's used for when people are working with or learning different things related to R, especially plotting. But basically it's a data set with penguin data. I assume this was really actually measured data. And so it's just a small data set that has information about each row is a different penguin, I assume. I don't know if these are repeated individuals or not. They don't really seem to specify here. So but yeah, they have species of penguins, what island they're on, and then some measurements of the penguins. Yeah, and so you can plot this data. So we'll just create a scatter plot with the body mass on the x-axis for all the data, and then the flipper length on the y-axis. And so we'll do that sort of basic static plot first to start with. So we're plotting our penguins data set. So body mass. This will on the x-axis and flip length on the y. And then we'll do this just as a scatter plot to start with. And so, I'm going to need the ggplot library too. We're trying this. Okay, and so we just have this, basic ggplot. Hopefully everyone here, it sounds like everyone's already familiar. So this basic plot of just 2 different metrics for each of these individual penguins. And so then we can use functions from ggAnimate to do some stuff with this. So basically, like you change what data you're viewing like over time. So you can imagine like if you're fast, you could facet this data. We'll do it by year. You could facet this data by year and it'll show you for each year what data points there are. Or you can use ggAnimate and you can basically have one plot, but it'll change over time. And I'll just show you how to do the simplest version of that using that transition group of functions. And the simplest one would be transition underscore time. And then it needs, it has one required argument, which is which of your columns that you want to be changing over time. And so in our case, because there's year in here, we'll say we want to transition, do the transition over year. It's like that. And so when I run that, and so this is one of the annoying things about using ggAnimate is that it does take a little bit of time each time you run one of these.
Yeah, because
So
it's
we have
got
to
to
wait for the
render all the
render.
frames for an animated GIF.
And it can, I mean, if you have really complicated data or you're doing it over a lot of different transitions, it can take even longer, but. Okay, so there we go. So now what this is doing is it's basically plotting the data by year, but then transitioning from year to year. And so it's not as obvious here what is going on because we don't know what year it's on. And so you can actually add labels that will show you like which of the frames basically that the image is currently on. And so you can do that by adding a label, which this is the typical way you add a label in ggplot. And so we'll just add a title that will identify the year. And so the way you identify those labels is by putting them in square or in curly brackets. And so I happen to know that the word basically that you use for this label is frame time. Sorry, pop up right there. And so here, I'll just run this first and let it render. And then I'll show you where in the documentation I found that. Because that's knowing what this is not necessarily obvious.
So while that's rendering, I'll just point out that one of the cool things about this is it builds on what you already know about ggplot2. So you already knew how to add a title to a plot, and you already knew how to sort of the concept of sort of mapping data to some aesthetic about your plot. And now you're basically just adding this new idea of mapping data to transitions.
Basically
You're
like
taking what you already know and
3D, it's like 3D at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like you have your two axes, now you have a third axis, which is time, which, well, in our case is time, but it can be other, you can do it over whatever you want. We could have done this across like islands, for example, and it would have transitioned between each of the, I think, 3 islands in the data set. Yeah. So yeah, these all builds, which is really nice. But so yeah, now you can see there's
the title.
And it's transitioning between the 3 years as it goes through those different points. And so the way that I figured out what that particular label was is that I looked at the documentation for that transition time function. And always good to look at documentation for functions in general. There's a lot of useful stuff in here, but I found that here. Yeah, so it says frame time is what is basically the label that you use, so label variables. And I think probably most, if not all, of the transition functions have this section in the documentation. So yeah, so that's a very, oh, where is it? Right here, viewer. So that, yeah, that's a really basic animated plot now that we created just with one extra line of code that we didn't necessarily know before. You can do other, and there's a lot more other complicated things that you can do with this. So this transition time function is a useful one. But if you want to start getting a little bit more particular about like how long these points are, like how long they're moving for, and then how long they stay in one spot, you can be a little bit more specific using the transition states function. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. And so if we look at the documentation for that function, so you can see this one has, it also requires like, what is the column that you want to be transitioning over, but then it's got these details about like transition length and state length. And these are relative values for kind of like how long it's taking to move between the different frames, which is in this case is year. So you can change, I think when you do transition length, you can see the default is 1. So if you make it shorter, I think it means they move faster. Oh, but I got an error here. I don't know if anyone can figure out why, where this error might have come from.
Provided file does not exist.
So this is not a very helpful error message, I will say. It took me a minute to figure out what the problem was. I can't.
Is it trying to
types? Oh, go ahead.
Provided file. No, I don't know.
Yeah, so the way that I was able to debug this and figure out what was going on is I tried running the function without the last line, and it works. It just means now the label's not there. So the thing I realized is that this label changes. So if you go down here, there's more label variables that are possible with this transition states function. And so I think I used closest state. So that means it'll display the year for whatever the closest one is. The closest year in this case. Closest state. So, and this will take a minute again to render, but it'll, yeah. So it's a very similar plot to the one we just created, but I think it's moving slightly faster between the different label states.
And pausing at each year.
And the pausing, yeah. And so I think the pausing is more controlled by this state length. I understand the documentation correctly. So yeah, like I said before, there's a lot of things to dig into here. Oh, and but there's another cool thing that I wanted to show. So shadows are one of the families of functions that you can use too. And I thought this was pretty neat. There's, again, multiple different flavors of this, but this particular one, oops, run that. So give it a minute to render. But basically it holds on, the wake functions like hold on to some sort of memory about what the previous data points were for. So we'll see in a minute, if this renders, that it'll do that. Okay, so you can see as the points are moving, it sort of has like a tail behind it from where it came previously.
Yeah. I
realized when I was doing this that this doesn't really make sense for this data because these points are not necessarily like repeated, the same individuals repeated. And so this this sort of wake probably is more useful if if each of these points is an individual penguin and you're measuring them each year, that would be more informative than it is for this, where these points are not necessarily like related to each other. But I still thought it was cool.
Or if you had means or something.
Oh yeah.
Or if you had like means by species or species and island or something like that. Yeah, that would.
Yeah, so they're more like related across time. But yeah, I thought that was a pretty neat usage of this. So let me say something else about that.
What kinds of plots have you used ggAnimate for in the past in your work?
I used it to create. Was that a question in the chat, or you actually?
No, that was my question for you because I thought it might be interesting. You know, because it's not only for scatter plots, it can be used for all sorts of different kinds of plots. And I was just curious because I know you'd used it before in some of the things. It was before I started that I think you used ggAnimate for stuff.
Yeah, so what I did was I had generated some data across grids across the US of like plant height or something like that. And I had data for multiple years, similar to what is here. And so I turned it into a GIF where these different grids were shaded a certain color depending on how tall the plants were. And then it would change throughout the years. And so the colors would change.
The colors
it's kind of cool
change.
to see the the sort of like transition, the change in values across time. So I guess it really is like a third axis. And again, you don't have to only use it for actually across time. That's just for me, like what makes the most sense, basically displaying like a time series of more complicated data than can be.
But that's cool. So that's and that's a great example where it wasn't like the points that were moving through time, but it was the color that was changing. So it's not just for elements moving around on the canvas, but also for colors and shapes and things changing like that. Yeah, it's cool. thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. It's always helpful to know when people are actually using this stuff in their real work. And it was more impressive. I mean, I could have displayed that data, like I said earlier, like you could facet this, so you could have, in this case, 3 plots for each year, but it's visually a little bit more impressive when it's like sort of changing across time. So people are like, ooh, look at that GIF of like the changing data.
Yeah.
Kathleen, you have a
Kathleen, did you have a question?
comment?
I have a quick question. Is there a way to make the tail persistent? The flipper thing, the line?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can keep
So
it
that
there
you
all
could
the
maybe
time.
just have a fixed image of the last year, but it would show the trajectory of how it got there.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I bet that
I
I bet you
saw an
can set
example of
that
this.
trail length to infinite or something, probably. Like if you did shadow trail and you set distance to infinity, I wonder if it would just that's just a guess, it's a wild guess.
Something like
but-
that, yeah.
Yeah, I just have a particular
And then,
application where that would be helpful.
Yeah. You can try that. Nope, it doesn't like that.
Doesn't
I
like
can dig
infinity.
around.
But you could
That
make it
there was a good-
large, probably.
There's a good resource. I found this good set presentation that might help with your specific question too. Oh, Andrew, I see your hands raised. We can get to your question or comment in a second. Oh my gosh, this is.
GG animate with a spooky twist.
I'm hitting enter. Nothing's happening. What's going on? There we go. Yeah, so I just found this person. I don't know this person, but they have this presentation. It's pretty nice. They use bat data. But this one is really nice because it shows a lot of the. So one of the problems right now with the actual GG animate documentation is that like some of the images, the plots are broken. So like this. So it's not really that helpful because you can't actually see what they're doing.
Right.
But these are working, and then they had a bunch of the shadow wake ones in here. And so this would probably be a good place to look to for your use case. Yeah, so views, I didn't actually create any of these, but so you see views, it changes where the X and Y axes are based on like what data's been plotted. So that's kind of neat because you can see as it's sort of like expanding beyond the original range of the data.
See, this all makes me wish I was working with some kind of biology or ecology and not humans, because if I put people running around like that, I would.
Yeah, you gotta put trackers on people and watch them run around. Like, yeah, they might not like that so much.
Working with humans is not a good thing. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Oh, so this one, yep, shadow trail right here. So this one, it looks like as the data point's moving, it's keeping retaining the points from the previous frames. So something like that. And I think there was
I see. Distance is how often they're pointed. Yeah. The distance argument, I misinterpreted it. It's probably the how often those trails are marked.
Yeah, as it's moving around in space. So yeah, and some of these are just like really cool looking. So yeah.
Andrew,
yeah.
did you have a?
Yeah, first that's like really cool. All the animated graphs. Whenever, so I like ran your code exactly, and I get like it gets the little making all the frames thing, but the plot doesn't show up after it makes all the frames, and I don't know why.
So I had troubles with this too at one point. Like it wasn't actually popping up.
Like it's telling me where it's saving all the PNGs. It's telling me that it's saved all of them to like the file destination, but it's not showing up in the little plot area.
Yeah, your like viewer is empty.
Yeah, my viewer is empty.
I feel like I also had this problem at one point. I had to like change maybe some of my like preferences. Because so sometimes with plots, you can have it so that it like either shows up in this viewer pane or it'll pop up separately as a separate window. Is that happening for you? Is it popping up in a separate window from your studio?
Nothing's popping up at all. And I don't have this, normally I don't have this issue when I make my plots, it'll pop up under the plots thing, but maybe it's the thing with the GG animate, because normal ggplots will pop up in the plots tab.
I wonder why that, and you're not getting any errors. It just says something like
I mean,
this.
it's the same thing as yours, is oh, there's like 50 more warnings, whatever, but I don't have any other errors besides that.
I have to Google this to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I can probably figure it out.
And it does so, and well, yeah, and if it's running the code and you're getting the same return, I was thinking there's like kind of a weird dependency under ggAnimate that's used to generate the GIFs called GIFski renderer.
Maybe that's
Mhm.
could be
And
it.
so I don't know, maybe that's like messed up. I probably have to Google to figure that out.
I'm having the same issue.
Oh, you are?
Hmm.
Okay, well then let's go ahead and try to. solve
I've
that
recently
problem.
learned about dependencies, and I've been told they can be very annoying.
Yes, they can be very much a hassle. So when I was using ggAnimate to create those maps of plant height over time, I was using a server, and every single time the server updated, I would have to have someone in our group go and reinstall this GIFski renderer machine. Every single time it would update, which was like at least once a month. So it was really, really annoying. So yeah,
That first link
definitely
looks
can
exactly,
be kind of painful.
That's the
Here we go.
first link is exactly what we're having.
that's exactly what's happening.
See, so for people who are not familiar, hopefully everyone here is, but Stack Overflow is a really good resource. People ask questions about technical problems and then other people answer it. Okay, install the PNG and GIFski packages and restarted our studio. So maybe I would at least start with restarting our studio and trying to rerun the code. And then maybe, yes, actually having to install these packages.
It's probably that one, the GIF ski or whatever.
Yeah, this is the one that we struggled with before, GIFski. Because so there's an R package GIFski, but that's actually a wrapper on top of a command line program. And installing command line programs can definitely be challenging.
Yeah.
So yeah, if y'all want to try that, let us know if you can get it working.
What was the other one? It was GIF ski and what's the other one?
PNG.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
dependencies
GIFski
can be helpful.
sometimes might be tricky to install, but yeah, if that's something that you need, we can definitely help out with that.
The
Cool.
common warning I get is just, oh, like this package was built in a different version of R, but that's not like a bad warning, right?
You can usually safely ignore that one. Yeah.
That's a warning I got. Oh, nope, it's all just about data points. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll try installing those packages and let us know in a bit if you can get it working or not.
Yeah.
Let's see here. What else was I going to say? Oh, so in addition to running these plots and looking at them within our studio, you can save them out as images too. And so the sort of simplest, we'll do simplest version of that and then talk about the more complicated thing. But so there's this function called anim save, which is from ggAnimate. And so you can see that it asks for the name of the file that you want to save it out as in the location, and then it will automatically use whatever your most recent animation was. So in this case, it'll be the one that I just ran here. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out locally. And if you're following along, you can save this wherever you want. I'm just going to call this
In my case, installing the package is PNG and GIFski, and then opening the libraries and restarting R solve the problem.
Yay!
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
is working.
But it's not Andrew who's talking, right?
No, this
Sorry,
is
I can't. Okay,
I
good.
just
Sorry, I can't
installed
see
them.
on my.
I just installed them. I restarted R, and we're currently rendering. So
Okay.
hope it works. I'm
Cool.
hope that.
all right. Thank you very
I know
much
that-
for your help.
Oh yeah, that worked.
Yeah.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yay!
Great.
Okay. Sometimes it's the old like, yeah, just turn it off and turn it back on again. Works a surprisingly high number of times. Okay, yeah. So for saving, this is a function that you can use to save out your GIF. So notice that I put a file extension .gif on here. You can save these out as static images too. It won't like run. It won't run the GIF. It'll just save each of the underlying frames as a separate image. So yeah, so I go ahead and hit anim save. You can save this wherever you want. I'm saving it on my desktop for the time being. And then so if I actually go and look on my desktop, you can see this. Oh, well, here, let me pull up a Finder window. So yeah, so now on my desktop, I have this new image shaved out, text anim GIF of that image that we just created. And then if I open it up all the way, it will show me just the static images. So you can see these three. Oh, I guess there's a bunch of them. Oh, because it's saving.
Yeah, and that's just how GIFs open and
Yeah.
preview, right?
So it's saving a bunch of different underlying images that are like stacked on top of each other. And I think you can probably control how many of those it's saving out. So if you're having like, if your GIFs are like really big, I bet you can like reduce the number of these that it takes, and it's basically would be like a lower resolution GIF. But I can look
And
at
then you
the
could drag
actual
that.
GIF. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, and you can probably drag that into like a PowerPoint presentation, for example, and have it be animated.
And probably like Slack. I bet if I put this in Slack, it'll actually run the GIF. So yeah, so that's the sort of most basic way to save out one of these GIFs. Then there's a lot of like different, basically like knobs you can turn to sort of save these in different ways. And so there's this intermediate step that you can use that's animate. Oops, is a function from the package. And so this is actually rendering it, so you can have some more control over things like how many frames you're saving, like resolution basically across time. There's a bunch of stuff in here. I don't really know what all these things are, but that's what the documentation is for. But so yeah, you can have this intermediate step where you basically save out your plot, and then you can read the plot into animate, and you can do things like something I was doing earlier. Yeah, like so the how many frames per second there are. So if we wanted more, we could specify, you know, I don't know, 50. I don't know, it's reasonable. Oops, in my plot. This might take even longer because it's more frames per second. But so yeah, this is a common, like, I think workflow for ggAnimate is to create your plot using some ggAnimate functions, and then use this animate to sort of like control basically like how the image is being saved, I suppose, or being rendered.
Make the finished product. Yeah.
Yeah, to make it look like you want to. So see, it's going way faster now between the different steps.
Nice.
So yeah, that is about all I really had as a sort of really brief introduction to ggAnimate. Like I said, there's a lot to this. There's a lot going on. So the code that I showed y'all is here in the slides just later on if you want to reference it. And yeah, definitely look through the documentation for this if you want to start doing some different things. Because there's some stuff I didn't cover at all that I don't really know that much about it. Like the view, we didn't actually do anything with view, and this enter and exit too. So, and then this ease aesthetics is something that I think is even more finicky. So you can get really finicky with this, I think.
Yeah.
That was so
I would
cool.
say, yeah, it's super cool. And I would say, and it is too bad that the examples aren't rendered on their website right now, but I would say it would be, if you're interested in it, go through, run those examples locally so you can see them, get inspired, because there's a lot of ways that you can use these animations besides just transitioning, you know, points through time. It can interact with different ggplot2 aesthetics like size and shape and line width and color, and you know, works with box plots and bar plots, all kinds of stuff. So you know, look at some examples, get inspired. I've never really had a data set where it's like made sense to make an animation, but I really hope I do someday because it seems like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So
It's definitely a lot of fun. I wanted to point out this blog post, which is where I took the plot. I mean, I took their code to create the example plot that we used. So just want to make sure I shout out to this person who wrote this blog post.
Awesome.
Oh, I see, Christine. Sorry, you said you also were having it where it wasn't showing the GIF. Were you able to get it working?
Hopefully.
Yes. Okay, great, cool.
Awesome.
So it worked for everyone.
Great.
Cool. Love it when everyone's having the same problem, it makes it easier to solve. So yeah, with that, go ahead and I'll switch back over to Eric to walk us through another.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to talk about interactive plots. So kind of along those lines. There we go. Here's my slides. So, okay, we did ggAnimate. So next I'm going to talk about Plotly. Plotly is an R package, but it's also what it is an interface to a JavaScript library. And the only reason that's really important is because if you Google for help on how to do something with Plotly, you might end up finding answers that are JavaScript code, and you might go, I've never seen R code that looks like this. And it's because it's probably not R code. Plotly kind of uses the grammar of graphics. It's sort of loosely built on the same kind of idea. But building a Plotly plot, an interactive Plotly plot from scratch in R is kind of tricky because the R package is not, it's not very well documented, and the arguments in the functions, it just takes lists, and so it's like hard to find stuff in the help files. But it does provide a very cool function, ggplotly, and that function will convert a ggplot plot into an interactive plot. And I say here 90% of the time, it gets you 90% of the way there. It doesn't work with every geom, especially if you're using some geoms that are in extension, you know, in other packages besides ggplot2. It might not work perfectly. Might not do everything you needed to do, but most of the time it is really awesome and pretty easy to do. So this is a simple kind of example. Oh, this is kind of large. Sorry about that. I'll show you in our studio later, but you know, a simple example where it's interactive, meaning I can hover over points. I can see information about them. I can drag to zoom. I can double click to unzoom. And there's actually tools over here that I can do stuff like comparing the similar points as I hover over them. You know, zooming in, zooming out. Again, selecting points in different ways, panning, and saving stuff out as a PNG. So this is kind of, you know, the basic here is just all you have to do is make a plot and then run ggplotly on it, and it converts it into this interactive thing. So I'm going to switch over to our studio here, and I was trying out some ggAnimate stuff. Delete that actually, and make that go away because it's distracting. Yeah, so let's see. Get my notes real quick. So I'm going to start by just copying this over, pasting it there. So again, I'm using that penguins data set in this example, making a scatter plot with geom point here. And then this is just setting the axis labels, and I like the black and white theme. And so if we look at just P, right, this is what it looks like over here. And then if I convert it to an interactive plot with ggplotly, it looks very similar, but now we can hover over points and see details. So this is kind of the stuff you get by default. This also works in like R Markdown or Quarto documents. So you can render them as an HTML, and it's interactive and in that document, which is pretty cool. There's not really a way to save them as like a standalone thing. So what it's outputting is like HTML code. And so it's really built for kind of the web, but there's lots of stuff that is the web. Like I said, again, you know, R Markdown documents that you render, or Quarto documents that are rendered. The slides, for example, that we're showing you are built in Quarto, and we can have that interactive document right there in the slides. So I just want to play around with some examples here and show you how they get converted over. So I think probably one of the most useful uses of an interactive plot is with something like a heat map. So I'm going to just get an example kind of heat map here from the help file for geom raster. So this is what that plot looks like. Let's make it a little prettier with maybe scale, color, scale fill, I believe, fill viridis. Okay, and then I can just do ggplotly, and this is like ggsave and that that's anim save, where by default it just works on the last plot. So if I haven't like assigned this to an object, I can just run ggplotly, and it'll convert it into something interactive. And so this is nice because a heat map like this is really, really information dense, right? And it's really hard if there's, some particular point that's standing out of it. For example, like a heat map of looking at gene expression or something like that, right? It's really nice to be able to mouse over it and see exactly what, gene or metabolite or whatever you're looking at in that particular square. And that's kind of the ways that I've used this in the past, just for my own use, just kind of like exploring my data, doing diagnostic stuff with my data. So nice to be able to get these tooltips. So it works with that, but it also works with all kinds of stuff, like just show you an example with like a box plot. I'm just going to grab the example here for geom box plot. And we'll see what that looks like. There's the non-interactive box plot, and we make it interactive. We can see the values for the median and the interquartile range, right? And the all these things by default, right? We can see all this stuff. This is probably not that useful with box plot. I just want to show you that it works with multiple kinds of geoms. Let's try maybe one more. Let's try like a geom histogram. See what that looks like. Grab the example again here. And then we'll look at how to customize some of these things. So if we make that interactive, now we can just basically see what bin it's in. So the x-axis is caret, and then in this example, right, and then the count is how many values will fell into that bin.
And this is
so
this is really, really nice because like otherwise you'd have to basically calculate what the plot is calculating under the hood, right? Like you'd have to figure out like what are the bin sizes, and then like subset your data in some way to figure out, or like summarize the data.
Building this from scratch, building this from scratch using the plotly package is it's difficult, mostly again because the documentation is not super great, and I'll look at it a little bit later on their website. So we can do some stuff to customize the tooltip, like what shows up in this thing that we see when we hover over. Let me just see here. I'm going to go back to this example and take this P. So we have our plot that we saved earlier. We called it P. I thought I did. Oh, I must have overwritten it. Okay, we'll do that. Oh yeah, I overwrote it here. Let's get rid of that. I call it something different later. So we have this. This is our basic ggplot. And if we want to make it, actually, you know what? I need to copy this whole thing. Okay. So, and I'm actually just going to get rid of this. All right. Okay, so we have our interactive scatter plot again here. We can add stuff to this tooltip, and it's kind of interesting how this works. All we need to do is give it an additional aesthetic here called text. And so, for example, I'm going to put spec in there. That's one of the variables in this data set is specs. Just using that as an example. And now if I run this, it's going to give me a warning, and it's going to say ignoring unknown aesthetics text, because text is not one of the aesthetics that geom point recognizes. But when we run ggplotly on it, it's going to pull that out. It's going to pull that out and make it part of the tooltip. So you see at the bottom there, it says male. So we've added some information to this tooltip. So that's like a simple way that we can kind of add a little bit of information to it. And then we can also give some arguments to this about what tooltip or what things we want shown in the tooltip. So let's go back to calling this P here. And then we have some options here. We have tooltip is one of the arguments. And this gets a vector of what we want to show up. So let's say we just want that text to show up. We just tell it, just show this aesthetic text in the tooltip. And so now it'll just show text. We can say show text and also fill depth in millimeters. And now it'll show this text aesthetic as well as some of the data there. You know, we could have it, we could add species, for example, and now we have that. So there's a little bit of customization we can do without getting too deep into the plotly stuff, which quickly gets annoying and complicated. Yeah. I'll show you one other thing and then we'll look at the website. You can also use Plotly to make animated plots. So we can do that. The example that I pulled earlier is actually using this other data set from the Gapminder. This data set is all about different populations and life expectancies and GDP of different countries through time. And it's a nice example for animated plots because there's, you know, this time series change. So I'm going to make this plot here with the Gapminder data set, GDP per capita on the x-axis and life expectancy on the y-axis. And then we're going to use, we're going to map continent to color. And then we're going to do a scatter plot. And I'm actually going to do some other aesthetics here. I'm actually not sure why they're in a separate thing. They probably don't need to be. But let's make the size of the points, the population size. And yeah, we'll do that for now and see what it looks like. Typo. Okay, so this is our plot here. Oh, and we're going to put this on a log scale so it looks better. Scale x log 10. Okay, so here's this kind of like messy plot, right? Everything overplotted all the years. And we're going to do something like we did before with that tooltip, and we're going to use an aesthetic that actually isn't a valid one. Frame equals year. And then another one, IDs equals country. So this is, I think it's using so that it matches those points from year to year. It knows which point is the same one, right? And so we had with the example with the ggAnimate points kind of floating around. Kristina talked about how the penguins data set wasn't really repeated measures. And so, you know, if we did have something that was repeated measures, this would be like the individual penguin ID, right? If we wanted to do that with the penguins package. So this is going to give us some warnings again. It's going to say there's these unknown aesthetics frame and ID. But if we run ggplotly on it, it will pick up on those and it will create an animated plot down here with a slider that we can move around. And we still have the tooltips and we still have the zooming and all that. So we have the ability to do all that stuff still. And yeah, we can create a quick animation using Plotly.
Are the sizes of the points changing too through time? I couldn't quite tell.
They should be, yes. It's a
Oh,
little,
yeah.
it's subtle, but if
Oh,
you
they
watch
definitely
that
are.
one, for example, it's growing. That's the population size. Yeah. So we
Yeah.
can, again, animate different aesthetics. And, again, like we're most of the way there, and we can, if we want to modify stuff, we can just modify it in the ggplot. So, if we want a different theme, we want theme minimal or something, we do that. ggplotly, it carries over. ggplotly like respects that, so we don't have to modify it using the plotly package, which again is like complicated. We can get almost all the way there with ggplot2 most of the time. And then I will just show you, I'm going to actually kind of skip to the end here because I have a link to the help file for this here. So yeah, so if you go to justplotly.com, what you'll find is this. And so Plotly is actually this JavaScript thing, but there's a Python package, and there's, the R package for Plotly, and there's a MATLAB version and all kinds of stuff. So this is like the R package Plotly. And so I'll just show you kind of what the building a plot from scratch looks like with Plotly, right? So we have this plot_ly. It kind of looks like ggplot, where we're defining, an X and a Y and a data layer, but it's different. And then we very quickly get into complicated stuff where there's all these lists with named arguments. And how do you know what the arguments are for marker? It's complicated. It's complicated stuff. But you can do more than you can just with the ggplotly function. So if you need something interactive and you need it a little bit more complicated, you might have to build it from scratch. Yeah, but you can also
So this
get
is,
to.
wait, sorry. So this
Yeah,
is
go ahead.
using Plotly without ggplot. Is that what's going on
This
there?
is correct. Yeah, it's still an R. It's an R package, but it's using just the Plotly package, not using ggplot.
Okay.
It's similar, right? So we have here, this kind of looks a little bit like adding, layers for points and layers for, like a geom tile or something. It's not quite the same, and there's different names and different arguments. But then where it gets complicated is whenever you're trying to, add additional tweaks and things, you get into all these lists, and the lists are annoying and complicated. But if you can manage to get to this page, this is using ggplot2 to kind of start with it. So this is where you go for help with the ggplotly function. And so there are things that you can customize, even just starting with ggplotly. So, and different kinds of plots that you can make. And there's R code examples in here for all these things. So we can, customize colors. This is again using ggplot, not really using the only Plotly code here we have at the end of these is this ggplotly function. But yeah, we can, this is the place to go for help for the ggplotly function. And I'm not really going to talk in this about using the Plotly package on its own. I just want you to be aware that it is available, and you might come to a situation where you really need an interactive plot, and that ggplotly function just isn't working with the particular geom you're using, or you can't figure out how to customize the tooltip the way you want. You might have to dig into the documentation for Plotly a little bit. Yeah. Questions about interactive plots with Plotly?
So like you said, they like when you save them, no one can really do the interactive stuff unless it's HTML or like in a PowerPoint presentation.
So yeah, as far as saving things out, I don't know if there really is a way to sort of like just save it as a standalone file. Let me just, it's possible that it is, so we'll just look real quick.
You can embed those in Shiny apps, right? And that's the way that other people can look at
Yeah.
it. But Shiny's a
So the
whole
way-
another beast.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just gonna double check that there's not like a write or a save thing. There's a save image. You can save a static image, but you can't really save it as an interactive thing because it's like an application. So where I would usually use these is in an R Markdown document that's HTML. You can embed that right in there, and then you can save that, the output of that HTML file, and you can like email that HTML file to someone. They can double click it and it'll open it up in their web browser. So that would be how you sort of save it, is as an HTML file with R Markdown or with Cordo, which is the sort of successor to R Markdown. And that again, you render it to HTML, you could save that HTML file, you could email it to somebody, they could open it up. So you can save it in that sense, but it's not like a standalone thing. It's part of this document. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
You can also, I mean, for thinking about sharing with people who are also less technical, you can publish your R Markdowns or Cordo documents on like our pubs, or we have our Studio Connect at U of A. And so that's another way that you could have a link to send to somebody so that they can see the interactive parts of the plots too. So
yeah. Cool. I'll pass it back to Kristina for the next one.
Yeah. Okay, so the third, I think it's on the slides. Yeah. So the third extension we'll talk about really briefly here is this one called, okay, I looked up how to pronounce this. It's a French word. I'm going to just say it wrong. I'll call it esquisse, but I think it's pronounced slightly differently than that. So sorry, I don't really have a French background. But yeah, so this is an R package that some folks created that's really cool. So apparently this word esquisse means rough first sketch in French, which really makes sense for what this package does. And so what this package actually does is basically provides a point and click platform to explore data. And so we'll actually do that and look at that. But first I wanted to talk about the documentation. So if you Google the name of the package, the word comes up, so it's not really helpful. So in this case, I would usually include our package esquisse. And then from there, you can get documentation from the creators, just like for all of the other R packages. And so they have some, oops, this right here under articles, there's like a get started guide. It's sort of like a quick launch into it. But yeah, so basically what this R package is really nice for is to have this sort of point and click interface that you can basically use to do exploratory plotting of your data. And so it's really good for exploring data sets, especially if like I can imagine using this when you get handed a data set you're not familiar with. You should look at the data set itself, of course, and look at the columns and look at what some of the data looks like. But then you can do really fast exploratory plotting of the data set using this tool. So that'll probably be the most clear if we actually go ahead and just start doing it. So following along, feel free to install this package. I already have it installed. And I'm going to, again, use the Penguins data set for this. One thing to note about this is that you will still probably have to do some modifying of your data set outside of this esquisse platform. So just within your R script. And so I'm going to actually take my Penguins data set and I'm going to get rid of all the lines with NAs because it causes some really annoying error messages to pop up. So I'm basically just doing a little bit of data cleaning right here on this. Oops, we didn't want to. Penguins again. Okay. Oh, and dplyr. Sorry.
I'll point out here that I just realized something that may have been confusing to folks. The pipe that Kristina's using there is the pipe that's from the tidyverse that's in dplyr and tidyr and all those other packages. And the pipe that I was using is the new base R pipe that's only in R versions 4.1 and greater. They both do about the same thing. Yeah, it's the vertical bar and then
Like this,
the
right?
forward caret. Yeah. So
Okay.
those are equivalent.
I don't even have to
If
look.
that was
Yeah, I don't-
confusing anyone.
Yeah, so this is like basically the new version of the pipe, which it looks like I can't use it. So
Yeah, you might not have the newer version of R or something like that.
but yeah, so those are
Anyway.
basically interchangeable at this point. Probably best if you
Yeah.
want to stay on top of the modern things. Eric's better at staying on top of the cutting edge with R than I am. So yeah, sorry, some of my stuff's a little bit out of date, but yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
I just wanted to clarify. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I took this Penguins data set and just removed any of the rows that had any NAs in it just to avoid problems in the future. But so the function from this squeeze package that we'll use to sort of generate this or bring up this point and click interface is called squeezer. Again, sorry, I'm saying this wrong. I think I know it's French. And so the only argument that this requires is some data sets. Whatever data set you want to do exploratory data analysis on is what you read into it. And so when you run this, it will have this window pop up. One second, I need to move my CV stuff out of the way a little bit. So yeah, so there's this window that pops up that is basically this nice interface for looking at and exploring your data. And so there's a bunch of little nice features here. You can see up at the top, these are all of the columns. So basically the variables that are in your data set. They've color coded them by the type of data that they are. So we've got continuous data and categorical data. Maybe these are factors, I don't remember. And then it's got this right here are all the aesthetics. So being familiar with ggplot, you should recognize some of these. You got the X and Y, and then some of these other grouping type variables. And so what you can do is you can take your variables of interest and just grab them and drop them into these different boxes. And it will immediately pop up with a plot of that data. And then up here in the left-hand corner is where you can select your geom or the type of plot, basically. And so one of the nice things about this is that it, basically it tells you what types of geoms you can use to look at this data. So this is, one variable continuous data on the x-axis. And so there's not really many options. I don't even know what this is. Yeah, it doesn't even show up. So yeah, histogram. But then so yeah, I can go ahead and grab another one of these categorical continuous variables and plop this down here. And that is not what I expected. Oh, I used the same one. My bad. Let me do that. No, let's do body mass instead. And so yeah, sorry, this is kind of like it's let me try to make my window smaller. So it seems like the size of this window is kind of determined by your RStudio window. And so I think if I see if we can make this easier to visualize, I'll rerun this. No, it's just really small. Okay, sorry about that.
It's okay. You can still see.
Hopefully on your own computers, it looks like you can actually see the whole plot in like one without having to scroll around, but it looks like I'm gonna have to scroll around a little bit. So yeah, so you can just throw in your variables and then it'll suggest you again, like different types of geoms that you could use to look at it based on what the underlying data is like. So it's really nice and handy. You can add in more things if you want to do like categorical data and have it plot by color. Super easy to just sort of like, play with these, add variables, take variables away. And then down here, they also have a bunch of other things you can do to modify what the plot looks like. And so this is plotting ggplot, like the plots are in ggplot, but it's sort of creating them automatically for you. And so you can do a bunch of other map modifications. You can change what the X and Y labels and the title and such, and the color labels, which is really nice. So yeah, I think this was what body mass grams. And then we could change the color label. It's lowercase species right now, so we can make it uppercase, so it looks nicer. And it just changes it on the fly, right? So it's really nice, really fancy. And yeah, so you can play around with all of these different options here. I won't do all of these, but just sort of like if, so earlier Eric log transformed that population data. You can do those transforms on the fly for the different axes. You can modify colors. See, this is all off the page, but up here, it shows the color palette that these come from. but you can also, choose your own colors. So I can like, say I want to make this like a dark blue for this particular species. And so you can see it like changed the color right there in line. So it's all this point and click stuff to generate these ggplots. Yeah, there's like tons of options here. You can move the legend, change the shape of the points. You can even filter the data. So like, let's say we only wanted to look at like some of the bigger individuals, you can filter it on the fly. And so I'm doing all these things, right? I'm clicking. And that seems like, okay, great. We have a plot here. And so, but this is really nice because it generates the code for your ggplot for you. And so you can see right here, these are all based on all the things that I've clicked on. All the steps are basically saved out as the corresponding ggplot code. And so you can either copy this code if you want, or there's this nice little button here. If you click it, it just, you can kind of see over here, but when I exit out, you'll see that it put this code into the script that I was currently working on. And so now it's saved out and I can run it locally. So it's super nice and super handy, especially if you're trying to figure out how to do something and you're kind of struggling with it. This is a nice way to maybe like help give you tips for how to do something. You can also actually just save out this image like as an image file using this button right here. If I click PNG,
including
I can
as a PowerPoint slide. That's interesting.
I didn't even notice that.
That's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Huh. I wonder what
Cool.
Okay. Actually, I haven't seen what that looks like, but yeah, so I can save out this plot. And now if I go to my desktop, I now have this plot saved out that I just created on the fly. Oh, sorry, I must have dark mode on, so it's kind of junky, but you can see it here. So yeah, this is a great tool, I think, for a lot of the different reasons. I think, yeah, especially if you have a new data set that you're sort of playing with and trying to figure things out, just wanting to look at things really quickly. I mean, you all probably like me have been like, oh, I have this data set and I just really quickly want to see like what this data looks like, but then you have to sit down and it takes a while to actually like generate the plot that you want. And so this is a way to do it sort of like quicker and dirtier and on the fly.
It's also a great way to learn how to do stuff in ggplot2. Like if you don't know how to move the legend to the left, you can do it in here, and then you can look at the code and see how Esquisse did it. And there it did it at the bottom, theme legend.position equals left, right? Now you just learned a new thing.
I used to in particular
move the legend to the left.
I used to in particular have difficulties remembering how to change the colors of things sort of manually like this. And so this sort of thing would have helped me a lot, be able to like figure it out faster. Because you can see here, they put in the hex codes for each of those into scale color manual.
And then I see that the shape equals diamond too. I always forget what the shapes are called. So that's really great because I have to look that up every time. Cool.
Yeah, so I think this would be really helpful for both self-teaching. I think also for teaching other people, this could be really helpful. And one, I think, use of this that could be really cool is you can embed this interface into a Shiny app. And so if you have a collaborator who doesn't know any R at all or doesn't know how to program, they could go in here and look at the data and mess around with it and create their plot of desire, and then have the resulting ggplot code, and then they could give it back to you for you to use, for example. So I see,
or download the image, right?
Or just download the image, yeah. So that it's basically like, skipping a lot of the actual needing to know ggplot and generating ggplot code like on the fly. So yeah, I had not seen this package before preparing for this workshop, and I did not know it existed. So I definitely think there's a lot of cool use cases for this. Oh, it also is, they have it in multiple different languages too. So the creators are probably French, given that it's a French name, but yeah, so they have this available in multiple different languages too, which is pretty neat. Not something you see a lot with R packages. So
yeah, not too
I
many
wanted to make sure.
multilingual R packages. That's awesome.
Oh, and the one thing I couldn't figure out is what this play button is supposed to do. I wasn't able to figure out.
Interesting. I was thinking it was gonna replay your steps that you took, but it's not doing that. So
Doesn't really
interesting.
seem to be doing anything. So if somebody could figure that out, that'd be cool. I don't know. Like maybe there's some interactive thing here that I'm like missing. I don't see anything that seems interactive in all these options.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funky. But yeah, so once you, I mean, so one of the, you know, when you X out of this, whatever you've done will go away. So if you didn't save out your
Mhm.
code, you can see here where it just inserted that generated ggplot code. You can see the filtering steps, like all those different things are basically encapsulated here. Oh, I must have clicked the button twice. Oops.
Awesome.
So yeah, this is cool. Oh, I see some comments in the chat. Okay, so question about the last stuff. So yeah, super cool extension to ggplot stuff. I think we can kind of get people moving a lot faster with writing ggplot code. So yeah, I think that was everything that I had about that.
Cool.
Oh, and in the slides I did, because I know that was a lot of different things. I kind of tried to include a little screenshot here that identifies like the different pieces that we just covered. So
Nice.
if you're trying to use this later on and have forgotten, this can be like basically a little visual cheat sheet diagram. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that's a super cool one. All right,
And I
we've
think
got
one more.
package that I want to demo for everyone here. Let's see if I can find, oh, the Zoom interface is in the way. Let's see. Okay. Okay, yeah, the last package is called ggRepel. And it does something relatively simple, but something that I think is really useful. It is great for when you want to directly label plots. So you want to directly label points or the ends of lines in your plot, rather than relying on a legend of some kind. But you've got lots of points, and those labels will kind of overlap with each other and make a mess. So geom it adds these geom text repel and geom label repel that kind of automatically figure out how to get out of the way of each other and out of the way of points, and to label your points or lines or whatever. So I'm gonna move over to our studio again here, and actually I already loaded that at the top of the script. Let's see. So I'm going to use that data set that I just showed on there. Was this built-in data set MT cars. It's kind of a weird one though, because it uses row names, and we don't use row names too often because they're just kind of funky. So I want to make this actually a column of the data set to start with, and that's going to make everything easier. So if you've never done that before, I'll show you how to do that. So MT cars, we're going to use the Tibble function here, or I'm sorry, I'm going to use the Tibble package as a, it has a row names to column function. Very useful when you have a data frame that has row names, but you want them to just be an actual column that you can use and extract. So now we've got a column that's called row name. If we want it to be called something different in here, there's one argument. I'm going to call that column car. So now we have a column called car, and it has the name of these cars. So this is this built-in data set about cars with variables like miles per gallon, the number of cylinders, displacement, I'm not sure what that is, horsepower, other stuff about cars, just as an example of something to plot. So we're going to call this, I'm just going to call it DAT. Think of better names for your real data, real variables, but for an example, we're just going to call it DAT. So let's make a plot that I had on the slides there. So we have on the x-axis, have weight, and the y-axis, we have miles per gallon. And then label equals car, that's that car column. Color equals, we're going to use the number of cylinders, and we're converting it to a factor right here. We could have done that outside of this, but I'm just going to do it right inside of the ggplot function. And the reason for that is because Here it's numeric, but it's really a categorical thing, right? It's not a continuous variable. And so we're going to use point for that. So this plots the points. The label aesthetic here is going to be used by either text that does that, or label, which puts them in these things here. But you can see this is totally overlapping the points. The points, you can't see them anymore because they're underneath. And in fact, if we switch the order of this, we can see there's the points now. So that looks bad. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to do point, and we're going to now try label repel. Do that instead. Ta-da! So that looks a lot better. Now we see there's a warning here. It says 24 unlabeled data points, too many overlaps. Consider increasing max overlaps. So there are some of these data points that are not labeled because it couldn't find a spot for the labels. So this, when you render this plot, it uses some kind of algorithm to try to find spots where these labels can fit and not overlap something else. And it is random, so if I run this again, the labels will be in a slightly different position. And so if I want this to be reproducible, I can use set.seed and give it, some number or something like that. And then if I do that, it will be the same every time. So if you find a particular arrangement of labels you want it to be the same every time, you have to do that using set seed. So sometimes what I'll do is when I'm really like ready to save this out, is I will just pick a number and I'll run it. And if I don't like the arrangement of the labels, I'll pick a different number. So how do we fix this issue with the 24 unlabeled points? There's different ways that we can do that. We can adjust those in a variety of different ways inside of this geom label repel or geom text repel. There are a number of different arguments here. In fact, I'm going to bring up the help file for that. So yeah, it's got a lot of arguments. And they all have to do with the appearance of those labels, or sort of how far away from the points they are, or they're getting nudged to the left or right or up or down. There's a lot of options. The one it suggests here is the max overlap. So let's just see what that does. Max overlaps, exclude text labels that overlap too many things, defaults to 10. So we can say instead, we're going to increase that to 20, like that. Is that the example I did? Yes. So now there's only 19 unlabeled data points because it's allowing things to be plotted that overlap more stuff. We can also make the labels smaller, for example. And that might help. Now there's 13 unlabeled data points. We can also change the label padding is another one. Label padding is the amount of padding around the label. Defaults to 0.25. We can make that smaller. Let's try 0.15. Now there's 2 unlabeled data points. And we can do stuff like we can force the labels to be further away from the points. We can spread them out. So force is the force of repulsion between overlapping text labels. Defaults to 1. So let's make that bigger. Force equals, I don't know, 5. This is all kind of trial and error stuff. Still says 2 unlabeled data points. I don't know what happened. What does it look like if we do 10? And see if we can see a difference. That actually made it worse. Let's change it back to 5. We can also just, there are options to make it try harder. So there's this max time and max dot iter for iterations. It's the maximum number of seconds to try to resolve overlaps. Defaults to 0.5. So increasing this will make it take longer to render, but it'll try harder to find positions where those labels don't overlap each other. We could also increase the number of iterations, but let's just try changing this max.time to like 1.5 seconds instead of 0.5 seconds. Now it's going to take longer to render, but it's going to try harder to find a spot for them. We could try this max.iter, what was the default, like 10,000 or something. So we could make this, 15,000 iterations. So now it's going to try 15,000 different iterations of where those labels are and find a spot. So there's lots of ways you can kind of mess with this to get the labels to all show up. The other thing I'll point out is these little trails here are really nice. And you'll see that by default, they only show up when the label is a certain distance away. And that is controlled by this min segment length argument. So if we wanted to, for example, always draw those, even if it's right on top of it, we can make that 0. And then it'll look a little bit nicer, in my opinion. So even when they're right next to the point, we get a little trail drawn there. So this is really cool. And we can also only label just some points if we want. And that's maybe a more useful, well, it depends on the use case, I guess, but you might want to only highlight a couple points and label them specifically. And you can do that in a way here. So I'm going to give this example. So let's label, what is it? Volvo 142E and Mercedes 230. These are these are values that are in that cars column here. These are just 2 points, 2 random cars that I want to highlight. So we can do our plot here. Our label, though, rather than being car, and actually I'm just going to get rid of this just for simplicity. Our label, rather than being car, we're going to do, we're going to provide it this logical thing. We're going to give it an if-else statement. So we're going to say, if else car is in our list of cars here, Volvo or Mercedes. This is basically saying if it's equal to this or to this, then give us that column, that car column. Otherwise, give us nothing, empty string. And now we can add our geom point and our geom label repel. And I did something wrong, I guess. Let's see, what did I do wrong? I feel like it's a parentheses is missing. It is a missing parentheses. Always a missing parentheses. Okay, and so now we just have just these 2 labeled, and we can, do this a little bit nicer. We can make that min segment length equals 0 again. So we draw the little thingies, and we can do some other stuff like this nudge X. So nudge X and nudge Y kind of push the labels along the X-axis or Y-axis, I believe in the units that are on the axis. So we'll try to push them over to the right and up. So we'll nudge them 0.5 weight units to the right, and nudge Y, we'll do 3 miles per gallon units up. And now we have those points a little bit kind of out of the way. Again, this placement is random. So if I run this again, they might be in slightly different spots. Actually, these times they're in exactly the same spot because they're not overlapping anything. But if we had more labels on there or more points, they might move around a tiny bit every time we rerun that code. So I'll just show you, I'll go back to the where to find help slide here, and I will show you the gallery of examples here also is really nice and useful. Different things that we can do with this labeling here. So that you can, have some ideas of things you can do with it. This was the one I was going to show you here. This is kind of a cool one, directly labeling lines. What they've had to do here is put the labels at the very end points of those segments, using the endpoint as like the data for the exposition of those labels. And now they're kind of cramped in there, but you can use a scale function here to expand the scale beyond where the data is. And that's what they've done here to make room for those labels. And now they sort of fit in the margins a little bit. So that's kind of a cool one. You can make curved little segments connecting the points to the labels. You can make arrows at the ends of the little segments, which is really nice. So there are lots of options for modifying all this stuff in the documentation. It's a great little package. I think it's really useful. Nice to be able to highlight a particular data point, or for example, if you have multivariate data and you want to label a score plot or a loading plot, PCA, like this might be useful. So yeah, that's the ggRepel package. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we were planning on demonstrating today. So I think at this point, we're happy to stick around and answer any questions, or if there were any other extension packages that you want to look at, we can poke around together. Yeah, otherwise happy to answer any questions. Oh, I guess we have I'll put up our getting help slide.
Yeah, I was gonna
while we
just do that.
Just gotta find the button. Here's the button. Cool. So yeah, we have drop-in hours on Tuesdays at 9 a.m. Which you are everyone's invited to come to and ask questions or just hang out. There's also the UA Data Science Slack. That's a good place to ask questions. There's an R Help channel in that. So there's a link to that there. And yeah, otherwise contact us if you have questions about ggplot or anything else data science related.
Hey, thank you for putting this together. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I can put the link to the slides one more time here.
Yeah.
That's the link to the last slide, but you can go back with the arrow keys or with this little menu there. Yeah,
Much.
Colin,
This was
if you
really
make something cool with GG Animate, come by drop-in hours and show it off. Would love to see.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Hey, thanks again. I'm going to drop. It was
Yeah.
very nice meeting all of you.
Yeah, nice meeting you as well.
Have a
See you
nice
later.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, I guess we were going to talk a little bit about our group, what we do.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
so-
Let's mention it
so,
right now.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea before too many folks drop off.
Real quick.
So yeah, I shared the link to our group's website. We're the CCT data science team at the U of A, and we're basically here to help researchers learn data science skills to improve your research, make things easier and better and faster. We focus a lot on R because that's what our group primarily uses, but we also can teach people things like version control and command line commands and lots of different things. And so we have workshops. We have monthly workshops that are on different topics, sort of similar to this ggplot series. We also have a a workshop series in the fall. That's 12 sessions that covers a variety of material, but is mostly focused on reproducible practices in R. And so that's a free to anyone, no cost workshop series that happens twice a week for about 6 weeks, I suppose. And really the focus is on learning these skills and then applying them immediately to your research problems. So yeah, there's an application on that for the workshop series on that page. So yeah, feel free to tell your friends, and if you're interested, sign up yourself. So yeah, that'll be starting in September. And then our group also, in addition to workshops and then the drop-in hours that are linked to on the slide here, we also have an incubator program. And basically that is an opportunity for people who are in ELFSKI, which includes the CALS department. So if you don't know if you're in ELFSKI, we can help you figure that out. But for people who are in the ELFSKI division at U of A, that's a chance for you to work one-on-one with people in our group. You get basically 80 hours of someone in our group's time to help produce some sort of product for your research. And so we've got a bunch of examples of incubator projects from the past on our incubator page. And so we've helped people create dashboards so they can more easily visualize their data, especially if they have really complex or high dimensional data. We've helped people create R packages. We've helped people improve just their data management workflows. We can help do a lot of different things related to both data management and analysis. So yeah, if you're in ELFSKI and that sounds of you have something that you think we could potentially work on, feel free to reach out to us, and we can. Usually those incubator program projects start out with a series of conversations about like, okay, so what's the problem that you're dealing with, and making sure that we can actually help you solve that problem. So yeah, we're service to researchers at the university. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us in any way, and we would love to help. So yeah.
All right, well, thanks everyone for coming. If there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and end the recording and end the meeting, and look forward to seeing you guys drop in hours or hearing from you otherwise.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.